Shinonuma, arguably one of the most difficult and underrated maps in CoD Zombies. A map so underrated and unique, it has one of the most interesting and shocking world record histories. So if it's so underrated, why do speedrunners play this map? How is it so difficult, and why does this map contain a near unbeatable record? On August 23, 2011, Shinonuma would be re-released for Black Ops 1 with the Resurrection DLC. This DLC contained a new map named Moon, as well as the 4 original World at War maps, one of them being Shinonuma. What makes this map stand out from the rest is the way the zombies work. Their pathing remains the same as other maps, however, the way they hit you is entirely different. On the normal zombies map, a zombie will typically hit you if you're right next to it. Although, on Shinonuma, the zombies will lunge at a player to hit them. The reason this makes Shinonuma more difficult than other maps is because the zombies that lunge into a player can deal more hits in a single second than any other map. Consequently, this made it very difficult for a player to avoid downs, because when a zombie hits you, you cannot sprint for a small period of time, causing many players to down to just 1 or 2 zombies. Lastly, what makes Shinonuma so difficult is the spawn control for the zombies. Unlike other maps which have very good spawn control depending on where you stand and which doors you have open, Shinonuma has almost none of that thanks to its big spawn areas. This is why Shinonuma is regarded as the most difficult Black Ops 1 map and arguably one of the most difficult maps in zombies ever. Despite all of this, there were still a few players willing to give this map a try. In fact, the first known record on this map would be round 45, achieved by Slippery Jim on November 6, 2011, running the Horde strategy. This strategy was fairly simple. Slippery Jim would train a horde of zombies near the communication hut. This allowed him to play safe and would gain points by shooting the zombies with the Thompson. Because he was gaining points, he would run over to the Flogger trap and activate it by spending 750 points. He would then let the zombies run through and die, allowing him to run back to the communications area and repeat the strategy. Obviously, this was an extremely slow strategy, taking him nearly 3.5 hours just to get to round 45. However, this would become one of the longest standing records on Shinonuma, taking nearly 6 months to be broken by Fishizor, who achieved round 60 on April 4th, 2012, running the Horde strategy. Although, there is one small change Fishizor made. Instead of using the Flogger, he would also use the Electro Trap in the communications hut. This allowed him to play faster, but it would also mean he had to play riskier, eventually causing him to game over on round 60. Surprisingly, Fishizor's record would not last for long. A little over a month and a half later, a player named Delicious27 would achieve round 107, making this the first ever round 100 on Shinonuma. At least that's what we thought. In Delicious's video, he mentioned he was 1 round off the record. This means a different player got round 108 before Delicious, making that the first round 100. The only issue is, the round 108 game was allegedly achieved by CG Gareth. This becomes a bit confusing because there's no documentation of CG Gareth achieving round 108. There's no footage or date or even a photo of him achieving this round. Due to this, I gave this supposed game a term, a ghost record. A record in which it is believed to have happened, but has no documentation nor proof of actually happening. So, if it's believed to have happened, what should we do? Do we count it or not? Well, to be safe, I won't. Instead, Delicious's round 107 game will be considered the first ever round 100 on Shinonuma. However, that wouldn't last for long, because just 10 days later, a legendary player named King Jack would reach round 119 running the top drop strategy. a new strategy which involved a player standing near the zip line and waiting for zombies to spawn. Once they got near the zip line, the player will drop down. They will then run through the trench gun and Thompson rooms to reach a flogger and activate it. Once they let all the zombies die, they'll run up the stairs in the main hut, rebuild the window across from the zip line, and repeat. Surprisingly, this strategy was relatively quick and safe. So why didn't King Jack achieve a higher round? Well, on 119, King Jack took it down, and thanks to Quick Revive, he was able to get back up and play again. Although, in order to continue playing, he needed to buy Juggernog, which is a perk that allows you to survive up to 4 hits instead of 2 before you down. When he bought Jug at the storage hut, he went to the left into a smaller hut. Unfortunately for him, 2 zombies would come through the small hut, forcing him to shoot his Wonder Waff. Despite him shooting the Waff, it wasn't enough time to kill both of the zombies, resulting him to down. This is why Shinonuma is so difficult, as a simple mistake can cost you an entire game. Despite all of this, some revolutionary improvements would be made to the top drop strategy. Fishyzor would come back and make his own strategy. Similar to the top drop strat, Fishyzor would stand in the spawn room near the zipline window, although he would keep the door closed to the stairs located near the mystery box. The reason he did this is because zombies would only spawn in the first room as well as the 2 windows near the zipline, allowing him to run down to the flogger. However, he would not activate it right away. Instead, he would run towards the fishing hut to bring the zombies near it and then instantly run back to the flogger, activate it, and then run back up into the spawn room. Obviously, the strategy was much slower than the top-down strat, although it was much safer. Due to this, Fishyzor would attempt to get his Shinonuma record back, eventually doing so on August 7th, 2012 by reaching round 135, beating his previous personal best by over 75 rounds. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot to talk about this record besides it being the first of many records to run his strategy. On January 28, 2013, another legendary player named Zombie Slayer Germany would break Fishyzor's record by using his own strategy, causing him to reach round 140, beating the previous record by just 5 rounds. The reason why Zombie Slayer Germany only beat Fishyzor by just 5 rounds is because his Xbox crashed. This is very surprising considering all of the previous records were deaths. The reason it's believed Zombie Slayer Germany crashed is because of the type of Xbox he was using. At the time, most players were using the Xbox 360 Slim, the latest release of the Xbox. This is by far the most stable Xbox release and very rarely ran into crashes. Due to this, it's believed Slayer may have had an Xbox 360 Elite, which was released in 2008. At the time, the console was very good, although it was never built for long gaming sessions, such as high rounds and zombies. Consequently, this would cause many players who played zombies to crash. If it turns out Slayer also used the Xbox 360 Elite, this would explain everything. Unsurprisingly, after Slayer's record, no crashes would occur for years to come, allowing players to push Shinonuma to its limits. Matter of fact, in just less than a month and a half later, a player named Frenzy would destroy Slayer's record by reaching round 169, making this the first time anyone reached insta-kill rounds on Shinonuma. If you don't know, insta-kill rounds are rounds in which zombies have round 1 health, allowing you to kill them near instantly. The reason this happens is because the zombie's health reaches so high, it tries to go over the 32-bit integer limit. However, it can't. Instead, what the game does is reset the zombie's health back to round 1. This always occurs on round 163. However, the next round, which is 164, won't be an insta-kill round, but then around 165 will be, and so on. This is important to know as players such as Frenzy have to switch up their strategies every round. Instead of running Fishyzor's strategy, Frenzy would buy the Thompson off the wall, stand on top of the zipline, and shoot the zombies during insta-kill rounds. And when he ran out of ammo, he would run back to get ammo from the Thompson wall buy, and repeat. While simple, this had become the main insta-kill strategy for many players thanks to its safety. Despite this, Shinonuma was still a fairly difficult map even with these safe strategies, eventually leading to Frenzy's game ending on round 169. After Frenzy's game, the world record progression on Shinonuma starts to slow down. Thanks to the release of Black Ops 2, many players flocked over to it because of the new maps. Also, Shinonuma was becoming pretty difficult. Despite the safe strategies, the zombies were absolutely relentless, causing many players to game over before they even reached round 100. However, just like any game, there's always a small community dedicated to pushing it to its limits. Within just half a year, Frenzy's round 169 game was broken by a player named BP, who reached round 173, a legendary record that became very controversial. The reason this record was so controversial is because BP only had 12 seconds of gameplay out of a nearly 80-hour game. On top of that, this record was accepted on Zombie Records, the main leaderboard website which kept track of every high round record. Whether or not this game was played legitimately, 12 seconds of gameplay is pretty laughable even for 2013 standards, and the fact it got accepted on the main leaderboard website caused many players, especially Frenzy, to be pissed off. So this begs the question, what did Frenzy do to combat BP's record? Well, he decided to get his record back. Round 186, achieved on May 21st, 2014. This was quite the record. Not only did he beat BP's record by 13 rounds, he also achieved the first reset on Shinonuma, officially making the map speedrun. The way a reset works is very similar to insta-kill rounds. Each map has a limited amount of time you can play. The reason for this is because of entities, which are objects and sounds on the map. The reason these are important to know is because they add up every 50 milliseconds towards a 32-bit integer limit, which is 2,147,483,647. Because a number is so large, resets can be extremely long. For example, Shinonuma has a 100-hour reset, although that can vary. If there are a ton of entities, the reset will be lower. However, if there's a small amount of entities, the reset will be longer. While this information wasn't used at the time, it would become very important in later years on maps such as Ascension, Shangri-La, Durice, and more. Due to this, Frenzy didn't get a 100-hour reset on Shinonuma. It's estimated he got a roughly 95-hour reset. Surprisingly, this record was pretty optimized as Frenzy ran a new strategy created by 5 and 5. The strat took every aspect of Fishyzor's strategy and improved it. Instead of running to the fishing hut, then back to the flogger to activate it, a player would activate the flogger right away and let the zombies run through it. Then you would wait for the zombies to spawn near the flogger area, run back to the fishing hut, and activate the flogger again. Compared to Fishyzor's strat, this is about 2 times faster. Because of this, the only way to beat Frenzy was to play faster. So, what some players decided to do was look for a better strategy, eventually coming across a drop-down strategy, which is once again created by 5 and 5. The way the strategy would work is a player would stand at the top of the zipline and wait until the last second to drop down before a zombie hit them. They would then run through the trench gun and Thompson area to hit the flogger and let the zombies run through the trap. Once all the zombies died, they would instantly run back up to the zipline and repeat the process. Compared to 5 and 5's old strategy, this was much faster. Depending on how consistent a player could run this, they could play at about 30 seconds per horde, or SPH for short. This meant players could finally get around 200 plus, although to survive up to that point is extraordinarily difficult. If you remember earlier in the video, I was explaining how Shinonuma has almost no spawn control and the zombies can down you near instantly. Well, because you're killing the zombies so fast and moving around a lot, the areas in which the zombies spawn in is extremely inconsistent. Furthermore, you only have 4 lives to work with before your game ends. This is thanks to a perk called Quick Revive, which can only revive you 3 times throughout an entire game. That is a very small amount of lives to work with, especially on a map like Shinonuma, which is a nearly 100-hour speedrun. Despite all of this, a few players were willing to take up the challenge of beating Frenzy's record. Specifically 2 players named Your Adopted and Space Marine. In late 2014, Adopted would start grinding for Shinonuma. Unfortunately, none of his personal bests were documented, just like Space Marine's runs. However, we do know Adopted's goal wasn't to beat Frenzy. He wanted to reach round 200 and beyond. This was a very difficult goal for anyone to achieve. To survive for that long seemed nearly impossible. Yet it wasn't at the same time, because on March 17th, 2015, Adopted would achieve round 202, beating Frenzy's record by 16 rounds. Amazingly, this record was still far from maxing out the map. You see, Adopted ran drop down very slowly so he could play safe. Furthermore, he reset 84 hours in, which was 11 hours earlier than the normal reset for console. Even though this was extremely unoptimized, a lot of players were discouraged because of how difficult and boring the map got, besides one person named Space Marine, who would achieve round 200 in July of 2015, just 2 rounds shy off the world record. What makes this even more heartbreaking is the fact Space Marine was roughly 3 hours ahead of Adopted. Also, Adopted reset 84 hours in, while Frenzy reset 95 hours into his game. So, if Space Marine didn't die and got a 95-hour reset, he could have reached round 220 plus. However, that wasn't the case. In fact, that would never become the case. Space Marine would quit zombies just a few months after achieving this game, and it would remain the highest round anyone would achieve on the map, besides Adopted, for years. The reason why is because throughout 2015 to early 2018, not many players attempted to beat his record because of how difficult Shinonuma was. Although that would change in March of 2018, when a player named Oxygen for the Win would release a spreadsheet detailing resets and how to optimize them to their full potential. This is arguably the most important piece of information discovered within zombies. Long gone were the days of inconsistent resets. Players could now remove certain entities off the map via doing Easter eggs or buying a door. Essentially, this meant one player would only have a roughly 10-minute difference of reset compared to another player. Zombies was now on an equal playing field. The only difference separating players now was RNG and skill. This brought a lot of attention and players to every single map in Black Ops 1. However, Shinonuma was still swept under the rug. Even after figuring out the reset, as well as discovering a new insta-kill strategy known as bar instas, which was at least 10 SPH faster than zipline instas, players wouldn't play Shinonuma because of its difficulty. Surprisingly, that would change relatively quickly. In mid to late 2018, a player named Turtles would start grinding Shinonuma and would push the map further than anyone did before. Unlike other players who focus on surviving instead of speed, Turtles focused on both, specifically focusing on round 30 and 50 speedruns, eventually achieving a 33-minute round 30 and a 1 hour, 24-minute, and 51-second to round 50. These were times that not many players could achieve. Turtles was simply better. He was nearly 2 minutes faster than second place for his 30 speedrun and was nearly 10 minutes faster than second place in his round 50 speedrun. While he wasn't going for the high round record, the fact he was able to save this much time in the lower rounds was pretty impressive. Although, Turtles was good at high rounds as well, eventually achieving the first ever sub 10 hour round 100 on Shinonuma, which is over an hour and a half faster than Adopted. Turtles would also achieve round 167 in 2019, making this the fastest ever Shinonuma game played, as well as the first time someone used bar instas. The way the bar instas worked is a player would stand in the doctor's quarters hut next to the bar wall by. They would then sit in the corner and shoot the zombies coming from the swamp area, as well as the 2 windows in the hut. This is much better than zipline instas and was arguably easier to do. Due to this, if a player ran bar instas as well as flogger at a fast pace, they could theoretically achieve round 230 plus. Although, just like always, to achieve such a round was simply too difficult, eventually causing Turtles to quit playing Shinonuma as he could never catch a break with the map. Despite this, his legacy would live on with the times he achieved, eventually inspiring some players named TangoFam, Mango, and Pez Rybread, all 3 of which were fairly talented at the game, especially TangoFam, who used to hold the highest round world record on Keen Under Tone, and also achieved round 131 running Semtex on Shang, which is thought to be impossible to run till reset. What makes him stand out from everyone else is how consistent he was at achieving high rounds, especially on Shinonuma, in which he would achieve around 130 plus multiple times. Unfortunately, there is no footage of these games as most players delete their footage, unlist it, or get banned off of Twitch, which removes all of their gameplay. This makes it increasingly harder to find gameplay. However, thanks to witnesses, we do know what Tango's highest round was on Shinonuma. Tango would eventually achieve round 187, downing to zombies because he thought it was an insta-kill round, making this one of the funniest deaths on Shinonuma. Amazingly, this wouldn't be the only unfortunate end to a high round. In 2019, a player named Xeron96 would crash on round 191. In 2020, another player named Pez Rybread would crash on 178. And in 2022, once again, another player named Mango would crash on round 188. If you haven't noticed already, all 3 of these maps have one correlation. They crashed. This is a common issue within World at War and Black Ops 1. World at War Shinonuma tends to crash as a zombie becomes increasingly unstable the faster you play. Although with Black Ops 1, nobody knows why players constantly crash. It's been assumed that playing too fast could cause it, similar to how World at War works. But in 2022, Tails, who is another player, crashed on round 186 despite playing slower than Adopted, eventually killing the theory. In fact, the amount of players that were crashing was so absurd, people jokingly suggested Adopted may have cursed his record to be unbeatable. It just seems so weird. How could such an unoptimized record stand for so long? Well, that would change in 2021. Remember Mango? Yeah, the guy that crashed in round 188? Well, a year earlier he did something incredible. Mango would launch up a Shinonuma game that would change every player's perspective on the map. Within his first 100 rounds, he would be nearly an hour and a half faster than Adopted, and by 150, over 5 hours. Amazingly, Mango would not crash in his later game and reach round 190, nearly 20 hours faster than Adopted. If Mango continued playing, he could potentially get around 235 and above. In fact, he would achieve something far greater than that. Mango would achieve round 198, downing just 4 rounds off the record. Despite not crashing, despite playing nearly 20 hours faster than Adopted, even Mango, one of the best Shinonuma players ever, could not beat the 202. Instead, what Mango would achieve is the biggest choke in Zombies history, forever haunting him. After Mango's 198 down, many players went from joking about Adopted's record being unbeatable to being serious about his record being unbeatable. No matter how good a player played or what they did in their game, simply could not push through round 202. It would always end to a down or an error. However, that still did not stop players from trying. In 2021, arguably the 2 best zombie players in history, named Furret Can Walk and Sluya, would attempt to break Adopted's record by doing something nobody had ever done before. Unlike most players who try to play fast but also safe, Furret and Sluya decided to disregard the safety and play drop down perfectly. So perfectly, in fact, it could be regarded as a task, eventually giving the name Perfect Trap Timing. By running drop down with perfect trap timing, you could play near 27 SPH, which is about 3 SPH faster than normal drop down. However, to achieve such a fast SPH, Furret and Sluya would need to play insanely risky, which is very difficult on a map like Shinonuma, which has zombies that will lunge into you as well as terrible spawns. Furthermore, they were also the first players to say Mule Kick was useless. Mule Kick is a perk on every Black Ops 1 map and allows a player to hold 3 weapons instead of 2. This is useful on maps like Shinonuma, as you can have a speed weapon such as ballistic knives or dual CZ75s to run faster so you can get out of sticky situations. Although, Furret and Sluya realized Mule Kick was not necessary. You could play just as well without the speed weapon, and if you played offline, you could remove Mule Kick, extending your reset by roughly an hour. Because of this, they decided to run perfect trap timing with no Mule Kick. Furret would go first and achieve round 157, which would become the first sub 9 hour round 100. Also, this is one of his first games on Shinonuma, which makes it even more impressive as he still had a lot to learn. However, that meant Furret would have to suffer some consequences. Because this is one of his first games, he downed 3 times before reaching insta-kill rounds, eventually leading him to quit out on round 157 as he didn't want to continue. This might seem a bit odd to you, because why would arguably the best zombie player of all time quit out if he had 1 more life before his game ended? Well, it's all about optimization. Think about it this way. Furret didn't just want round 202, he wanted round 240 plus. Although, he downed 3 times within the first 30 hours out of a 100 hour game. So, instead of continuing and potentially downing 20 hours later, Furret decided not to waste those hours on something that would more than likely never happen. Sluya, on the other hand, would reach higher by achieving round 178. Unlike Furret's game, Sluya game overed. While that doesn't sound special as players have achieved higher, this was Sluya's first time achieving round 100 on the map and downed on round 90. That's extremely impressive for arguably one of the best zombie players of all time. Surprisingly, this wasn't the last big game of the year on Shinonuma. Remember Tails' round 186 error in 2022? Well, in March 2021, Tails would once again error on round 157, and then in June of 2021, Tails would down on round 174. While these rounds aren't super impressive, keep note of his name because 2022 would be an even bigger year for Shinonuma. Near the start of 2022, Mango would come back and crash at round 188. What makes this so unfortunate is the fact Mango played flawless, which means he didn't take a single down throughout the game. In short, no matter what Mango did, he could not break the curse. But it did give one player an idea, and that player was Tails. So what did Tails come up with? Well, if you paid close attention to all the errors and crashes on Shinonuma, all of them occurred on PC. Because of this, Tails came to the conclusion that he might need to play on console to beat Adopted's now 7-year-long held record. And that's exactly what he did. But there is one catch. Instead of playing on the Xbox 360 Slim, he decided to play on the newly released Xbox Series S. The reason for this is because the Xbox Series S ran better and had no trap lag. Furthermore, Tails would run a very slow but safe strategy known as the Swamp Horde. The way the strategy would work is very similar to Drop Down. Tails would stand near the zipline and, well, drop down. However, instead of going through the main hut, Tails would train in the swamp area near the zipline. Once he got the entire horde, he would then run to the flogger, activate it, and then repeat. This is much slower than Drop Down, but Tails didn't care. All he wanted was to break the record. It wasn't until March of 2022, Tails would finally start up a few games on Shinonuma, most of which wouldn't go anywhere as he constantly had to restart for Double Tap and the fishing hut. The reason he and many other players do this is because it makes floggers safer and faster, essentially canceling multiple spawns. However, the restarts for this are extremely annoying. First off, a player has a 1 in 4 chance of getting double tap, and when they hit the mystery box, there's a chance it could move, causing it to go to either the 4 huts on the map and the main hut. So the chances of him getting a setup is surprisingly small. Amazingly, Tails would eventually get a setup, allowing him to go for the record, which would eventually go down in the history books. You see, Tails wasn't the best player. He would take 3 downs on rounds 120, 154, and 180 running Swamp Horde, which is, well, extremely easy. On top of that, he would run the old zipline instas, which were arguably easier on console as he's playing on controller compared to bar instas. However, none of that mattered. While he was nearly 6 hours slower than Adopted and an extended reset, Tails got the record. He finally beat the Unbeatable. You know what makes speedrunning zombies so special on certain maps? You don't need to be the best player. In fact, you can be a mediocre player and still hold yourself relatively well, just like Tails did. All it takes is a small push of effort and playing just like the record holder, and bam, you made history. Anyway, I know what you're asking. If Tails reset on round 206, what's possible on Shinonuma? Well, if you play just as good as Furret or Sluya with perfect trap timing, keeping the hut closed for half the game so you get an hour and a half extra reset, as well as removing Mule Kick for an extra hour of reset, and playing STG instas, which is an even faster strategy than bar instas, you could be looking at a possible round 250. So, if that's the case, who's gonna do it first? Is it Furret or Sluya? Maybe Mango? Maybe you? Well, if that's the case, I'll leave some videos down below so you can learn the strategies. I'll also link all the players as well as the people who helped me gather information so I can make this video. And lastly, if you're interested, I have a Twitch channel, so if you have any questions for me or just want to watch me play, then you can check that out. As well as my shorts channel, which I plan on uploading strategy guides that will take under a minute to learn. Thanks for watching.